Deleted session, August 29, 1977. Now, good evening. The practical experience of reality is formed through the subjective psychological idea shapes that appear in the guise of theories, dogmas, and assumptions. The theory of evolution represents a magnetic organizing subjective hypothesis. It can, even in scientific terms, never be proven. Under its banner of suggestion, however, the great parade of men and other living creatures are observed so that the hypothesis brings about its own hypnotic focus, so that creatures, men and indeed the universe itself, seem to behave in certain highly ritualized fashions. In a manner of speaking, the motives familiar to man are applied to the smallest microbe. More than this, however, the theory's vast subjective nature forms a framework through which people then view the experiences of their lives, and through those focus, the behavior of their own species seems determined. The theory, then, is a way of organizing experience, a subjective hypothesis. It is indeed no more than a point of view. It has colored man's societies and cultures since its inception. It has dominated economical systems. In that regard, for example, James was quite correct. Certain religious societies interpreted the theme so that it read evolution of the soul, but there is no soul in Darwinian theory, and hereditary, and certainly none in the environment. I do not think you understand yet the importance of suggestion. For once you said to me, suggestion cannot be all that important. Rob said, I said that? I didn't remember doing so, and I certainly wouldn't say so today. They said, you did indeed, not in that context. There is little difference, however, between private suggestion in your personal lives and the power of mass suggestion in your society. Suggestion not only impels toward action, but causes you to interpret action in a given manner. In strict Darwinian terms, man and animal alike had to be turned aggressively outward in the most competitive of physical ways. A new achievement on the part of a species, or any mutation occurred as the direct result of personal experience, and of course, no information was available otherwise. In deep terms, the world had an outside only. It was empty inside. The soul or any remnant of it vanished, so that all of the action had to occur in an arena where competition ruled. Life was not trusted. You could be betrayed by your genes. There was no purpose in nature except its own mechanical reproduction. The individual had no importance once it served its part in reproduction. These ideas went a long way to justify later scientific experiments that involved giving pain to animals. For example, nature itself had no feeling. It was seen in human terms as inhuman. Life without reason, life with no purpose except its own repetition, life in which the individual was dispensable. Many people cannot operate under that kind of system. The individual shouts that his life does indeed have meaning, while the scientists until now have vehemently stated otherwise. Why then did such a theory originate? Darwin was initially a religious man. Like many others, his religious background held out nonsensical propositions. It saw a good God, a just Savior, who nevertheless never thought twice about sending down death and destruction as punishment for sin. Darwin was faced with the proposition of a kind God who was more cruel than any human being and with supernatural power behind him to boot. So Darwin tried to justify God's ways to man. Nature took the place of the devil in an insidious sleight of hand that initially Darwin himself never expected. He wanted to show that God was not responsible for the world's cruelties. Darwin loved nature in all of its aspects, yet he could not reconcile its beauties and standards with the course of its events. He could not bear to see a cat play with a mouse without blaming God, who would permit such cruelty. He tried to wipe God's hands clean, as he understood the nature of God through his early beliefs, but in so doing, he wiped the soul from the face of nature. To a large degree, however, and for many people, he did remove the idea of God's injustice, even if he removed the image of God in the process. The idea of one God as a Superman would not carry again the same weight as it had before. For your species, the questions behind the conventional God, the Father, were at least brought out into the open. Those theories of Darwin, however, formed part of the suggestive background in which you and Ruber and millions of others matured. Each person interpreted those beliefs in an individual fashion. Sexual, economic, social, and even religious behavior became tinged by these concepts. The value of the artist was deprecated. Contemplation had little part to play, as perchance it was no coincidence that the beliefs of Freud and Darwin merged so well to form Western society's idea of the self, physically and psychologically. The ideas of financial competition advocated came into direct conflict, Joseph, with your own inclinations to be an artist. The ideas of manliness in your society, particularly in past years, were directly tied in with Darwinian concepts and the Freudian theory. They operated as suggestions that directed the actions of millions of people and provided a framework through which they experienced their reality. Now, when either of you or both of you feel that there might be something wrong in spending your time thinking, writing, painting, or worse, daydreaming, you feel that way because your way of life beats some conflict from old Darwinian and Freudian beliefs. You should be out there in the world, active, competing, or even just riding bicycles. In other kinds of systems, great premiums would be put upon your work. I want you to understand personally the importance of such suggestions, particularly when they have authoritative backgrounds. For example, Ruber's dated status and your somewhat nature concern with the tambourine walking difficulty. You know what I am referring to. I say to you that the concern is nature, for it certainly seems so to both of you. You have little idea, however, how sometimes the most nature-seeming reactions are not nature at all, but programmed. An animal, say, in Ruber's position, feeling as much new activity in the body, new motion in the knees, new elasticity in the ligaments, would quite naturally accept the improvements with physical elation, even if it had more difficulty one day or two than it had in days previous. It would sense the body's interstate condition. It would not worry, but would exercise whatever new motions were possible. It would take it for granted that its body knew what it was doing. It would not be hampered by remnants of Darwin or Freudian concepts. I want to show you where culture and cultural beliefs meet with your private experience. Ruber's body needed more challenge. Before this latest episode that upset him showed, important releases in the hip sockets occurred, with hardly any notice on his part. Little inconvenience. The amount of new motion there was minute, but vitally important if his stance upward were to improve. That small alteration, however, immediately altered the leg's position, however minutely, placing new challenge upon the entire leg and foot region. That challenge further activated additional motion. It is almost impossible to explain how intimately your psychological beliefs program your experience of events, or to tell you how to interpret them. Any animal would rather be running and physically vigorous than not. But when an animal is improving, he goes along with the improvement. If Rupert suddenly walked more poorly than usual, as for the last few days, showing no other signs of obvious beneficial change, then that would be something else. There are natural bodily reactions, however, and psychological reactions that may seem natural, but that often are contrary to the body's knowledge, and that can block that knowledge with the sense of reassurance that it can bring. Rupert's eyes change constantly while improving overall. It may seem to you that this is indeed a very strange condition. Rupert certainly finds it disconcerting at best, and at worst worrisome. The eyes, however, quite naturally in their motion, are connected with all of the body's other motions. They are healthily responding. Rupert's new attitudes and intentions to be responsive are renewing the body. The fears and anxieties, of course, do not help. They add tension. You are going ahead in spite of the worry. The entire jaw is being realigned to its nature and most ideal position. This is allowing all of the other bodily beneficial changes. Animals have their own culture. They understand it differently, however, but it is taken into consideration in physical terms. You are doing very well. And your own beliefs are changing, Joseph, perhaps in greater fashion than you realize. The idea of Rupert's teeth should be dropped, however. The concern over the matter becomes far more an impediment than any actual loss of his teeth. Yes, police could save the rest of them, but both of your interpretations about teeth at this point hold you back. The work of the jaws necessitates the actions occurring, and if the new jaws end up with new teeth, Rob noted humorously. They said that must not be considered a failure or a tragedy. That fear is precisely what keeps Rupert from saving the teeth so far. The teeth business has to do also with Darwinian concepts of age, with thought of the animal not surviving, and in your words that is ridiculous. The fears behind the fears are groundless. He must not be so afraid, then, of losing the teeth, and then perhaps he can save them. But in any case, you both lay highly negative and unwarranted suggestions in that area. Darwin concepts allowed the passage of no knowledge from one generation to another that was not genetically transmitted. It did not understand the inner communication of the animals, and certainly it did not admit any altruistic animal intent. To some extent, the Freudian self, as per genes, more or less followed the same pattern. A man could scarcely treat his neighbor if he agreed with Darwin or Freudian concepts. Behind any altruistic impulse, there had to be a selfish gain. Before all of this, however, nature was seen as primarily passive, put here by God for man's purpose, but without possessing the uniqueness or even approaching the status of man. Darwin managed to bring out nature's complexity, though this had been mentioned by other men. I believe by a man called Mendel in particular, but Mendel did not catch man's imagination. Darwin then, brought nature to man's focus in a new way. For before, neither science or religion had dealt with it in a meaningful manner. The full sweep and extent of the natural world, with all of its seeming ambiguities, cruelties, and splendors, had to be accepted as more than a passive package delivered into man's hand. Darwin's theories and fruits, for that matter, will in the future be seen as any other antiquated, outmoded system. Yet from their ashes will rise new ways of interpreting and expressing reality. You may take a break or end the session as you prefer. Rosit will take the break then. Say it now, even before you met each other, many of your private abilities and the thrust of your intellects and intuitions made no sense in Darwin or Freudian terms. This applies to you both. In those terms, what value is there in any love of contemplation for its own sake? You hastened, Joseph, to put your talents to the proper Darwin and Freudian goals, to make money and to compete. Understand, I am not saying there is anything wrong with making money or in competition. Say, only when these become primary, so that other stronger individual drives must necessarily be put in secondary or third place. Ruber went from a strict religion, embracing both Darwin finally and Freud also, as liberators from old doctrines, not realizing, of course, that he was substituting one dogma for two, period. In Darwin and Freudian terms, certainly later your joint and private pursuits literally made no sense, nor did they conform to any organized religious framework. Many of your difficulties can, as your own nature imposes and the natural inclinations conflicted with both Darwin and Freudian concepts. Your own behavior with your parents, with Ruber, your attitudes toward your painting and outside jobs, Ruber's attitudes toward children, his work and you, all of these were so influenced. You set up defenses, privately and jointly, providing justifications, so that you could do your own thing, and hold your head up, in the world of those beliefs. When you wanted to quit your job, you became ill, so that no one could blame you. That was years ago, when you were working full-time. This would give you parental acceptance. Illness is a face-saving device, socially, often occurring where private beliefs and feelings find irritation with mass beliefs. Our sessions began, and you managed to make other changes or compromises. You worked part-time, and so did Ruber. This had some advantages, but also many points of conflict. When either of you were offered jobs with advancement, you avoided them like the plague, idiotic behavior in Darwin and Freudian terms. Yet those terms influenced you both. You were involved in work that required growing trust of the self. Your painting required it, but Ruber's position required it still more. The self could be trusted least of all, however, so that Ruber felt a necessity to criticize his procedure and performance, that he was leading you and he both down a Freudian garden path. That young psychologist brought all those doubts to the surface. He was young and following Darwin and Freudian concepts both. He was therefore vigorous and to be trusted, where Dr. Instring was in his dotage. As a woman, Ruber was in a worse position than you from both theories. He took greater precautions, therefore. Now that is the climate in which you began our work. You have learned much, but until lately, you always interpreted your position in the light of Darwinian and Freudian concepts. You want the books to sell well. That is natural. Your naturals, however, are not particularly competitive. There is no reason to feel that you should. Rob noted, underlined 3 times. They said, be out there, selling books. You'll naturally both concentrate on ideas. Let alone that concentration will naturally seek expression, amplification, and might result in, say, if you wanted it, some tools. But many of your ideas, they are your attempts to bring your work into Darwinian terms. In the more important ways, you have left those frameworks, and your hearts were never in them. Now it is necessary that you, consciously and with greater understanding, set up your own alternate framework. Rededicate yourselves, as per my last session. Together each morning, reinstate the library at least twice a week. Rupert's return to his writing will again trigger psychic response and creativity. With that work, the comparatively few visitors will fall by the wayside in importance, and Rupert's condition will improve more smoothly with his main concentration elsewhere. Your preoccupation with such matters has certainly hampered your creativity. Your preoccupation with Rupert's condition, however, was beneficial for a while, because it upset the status quo, shook him up, and started him more firmly in the proper physical direction. It should not continue, however. It was necessary to unite you both. Period. End of session. My heartiest regards and a fond good evening. Ross said, thank you, Seth. They said, unless you have questions. Ross said, no. They said some of these can be used, if you want to, in an appendix to the new book. Ross said, all right.